Hello, everyone. I know I'm live. I'm looking over my laptop so I can see the written questions. If anyone's watching, my name's Dustin. It's really good to see everyone. I'm here in Oklahoma City where it's currently really sunny and muggy right now. So we still have a lot of summer left, which we'll see how that goes. But yeah, so giving you a quick mic test here, chatting with Pyramind, both virtually and here in the stream, as I can see you all right there. So, giving a quick mic test. Everything's sounding good. I'll give you a little bit of musical test too as well. Here's a little Juno pad. Hey, so unless you want to hear me play some beautiful Juno 1980s pad music for a little bit, I'd love to hear some questions from you all. Really about anything concerning Ableton Live, Push, even using Link with mobile apps, those kind of things. And it can go from making music, writing music, composing music to some techniques or some nerdy things right in one of the devices. All of the above. It's kind of an open floor, and I hope I'll give you some sort of decent answer on anything. There's a bit of a delay, I think, between some of the questions and the video that's going to be coming in, so bear with me on any delay as we get used to the timing of things. But I'm a drummer by most trades, so if I get weird about timing, it's because I play drums. I'm used to that. So synths are sounding good, voice is sounding good. Looks like we got the audio side okay. Now we just got to get some great questions from you all. So I'll be here ready to go and make sure that I get a few other things up on the screen. So I'll test a couple of the other visuals in case you guys have questions about what things look like on Push as I'm playing them on that. I've also got a camera on it right in front of me here. I'm sure I will describe this a few times, but bear with the red LEDs of Push. I set a red colored drum mute, like a moon gel, on that, and it decided to leak into the pad. So thanks for that, moon gels. So this is a very customized special push that I have here in this case. So Rod Docker, I see you asking over here on YouTube, do you know how to make those really heavy, blown out kicks that are real popular in trap and bass music nowadays without clipping? So that's a great question. And doing anything without clipping first has a little bit of an idea of what clipping actually is when it comes to the audio side of things. So I'm going to go ahead and set up a track here with just a real simple kick drum loop. And actually, we'll do that with just a MIDI drum loop here. Create a new MIDI track. Put in a drum rack here, and I'm going to take a sample, or actually from my drum one-shot hits here, I'll go to the kick on the browser and make sure that you all can see this on the screen here. There we go. I'm going to make sure that I can see Ableton Live over here on the YouTube stream, so it might take just a second to pick up over here. Let's see if it's transitioning. Just made the drum rack on the screen. So I'm kind of testing my latency out with you all here. There we go. Okay. So pulling a kick drum into my drum rack. Now I'm going to go with a fairly simple sound. Now part of Rod's question, sorry about that, initially is you may find a sample that has something similar to the sound that you want. But the idea is, how do you get a very nice blown out sound without necessarily clipping the output of it? Now, clipping the output of your DAW is going to be something that has to do with all of your gain structuring from your channel to your master track over here. But just getting the sound in the track itself and trying to get that out of the kick drum, I'll go with some of Live's native options and then some of my favorite third-party options as well, if we have time. But some of Live's native options for getting just a saturated, blown-out kick drum sound, you may start with the saturator device itself. So hopefully everyone can see this. I'm going to zoom in and see what that looks like over here on YouTube as well. So while I'm waiting for you all with these latencies, you'll just have to bear with me. Looks like it isn't too far back. Come on now. Make sure that it zooms in okay. It looks like it might not be following the zoom too much. That's okay. So I've got my saturator up here. I'm going to drag and drop it right after this kick drum sound and keep it right with the kick drum sound in the drum rack so that it's not affecting all of my drums just yet. And one of the best ways with Saturator to get a nice blown out sound, it looks like there might be a little bit of issue with the cropping of the screen. So let me pull this window up and see if this helps. Right here. You have to bear with us, or bear with myself and Pyramind as we figure out what the best cropping is for the screen here. I want to make sure you all can see everything that I'm seeing. Looks like it's not quite cropped right, so I'm going to do back here. Oh, there we go. Never mind. All right. So now you can see with this kick drum up and with Saturator right here, one of the best controls for adjusting what's happening with the kick drum and Saturator is this bass control right here. And so the bass control, this bottom left-hand little dial, if I create just a very quick 4 on the floor pattern here. So I've got a nice little 4 on the floor loop. Hopefully everybody's hearing that loop just fine. Turn that up a bit. Using just this bass frequency, or this bass, adjustment, you get quite a bit of that kind of clipped out, crapped out drum sound without adjusting anything else in Saturator. That's one of my first go-tos for a very lo-fi distortion sound, is just adjust this bass. And then the intensity of whatever tonality you get out of that bass control, you can adjust with the drive, which of course is going to get it a little too hot. And any time that you're dealing with something that relates to clipping, remember that in live devices, whether that's an instrument device or an audio effect, you can see this little meter on the output here. And as long as I'm getting the clipping effect that I want without this meter clipping into the red on it, I can see that it's going to the next device, and so on, then I'll be in good shape, more or less. I'm also not getting clipping on my master output, nor on the channel output itself here. So that's one good way to do it. Another way, without using Saturator, and of course Saturator has a lot of algorithms for different colors and levels and intensities of distortion and saturation. You can try this also with the overdrive device, of course, but don't forget about the amp device. The amp device has a really nice, different kind of distortion that may not be the first thing you pull down because you think, oh, it's for guitars, for guitar amps, that sort of thing. Which, of course, you know, that can be just as creative as much as running your sounds through some analog distortion pedals as well. And you'll get with the amp a lot more high frequency than you get with the Saturator. And you can dial in just a little bit of EQ. Try the different models from clean. And you see that I'm getting quite a bit of output now on this clip, or on this device. And so I can pull the volume back down to get it back out of clipping, going to the next device in the chain. You get quite an interesting blown out kick drum sound just from that. Just from going through our different device types, or different amp types. And if you really want to get crazy, put a cabinet after the amp. And now your kick drum is going out through a speaker itself. You can try the best you can to blow out that speaker, but this way is a little less destructive than doing it in real life. And you can hear the change from without the cabinet to the cabinet being there. So those are a couple of quick ways I do it with just Live's built-in devices. And hopefully, Rod, that's a good little starting place for you. Just with those two things, Saturator, and then the amp and cabinet potential combo, those two things themselves have quite a bit of a range of sound for you to really kind of blow out some kick drums on it. So start with that, I'd say, and see where that leads you. Best way to jam chords on push is a question from Matt, and that's a really fun question here. So I'll go back to my big synth sound here we got right here, so that'll give us a good wide-ranging sound to work with. So jamming chords on push depends on whether you want to be in chromatic mode or be in key mode or in scale mode. So let me pull up push on the video screen here. Make sure that that shows up to everyone real quick. And by the way, the sound that I'm using for this is Afro DJ Max Juno pack, so Juno 106 pack, which is a really, really cool sound pack. Very great. All right. Let's see here. I'm going to go in and put down my brightness just a little bit here so you all can see the pads. And I'm going to pick a color that's a little different for my track, so it's not quite as, you get a little more contrast out of it. We'll do something like that. Cool. All right. So in playing chords, the real breakthrough for me happened when I realized that the chords are shaped in triangles. And this is something that's it's no, surprise or kind of big revelation for anyone, but the chords are based around triangles when you're in key mode. And that means that each one of my colored notes, remember, are going to be the tonic or the root note of the key that I'm in. When I push the scale button, I've got all my different keys right up here. Right now I'm just in C major. And C major, if I go with triangles, that's going to make a major chord triad, a 1, 3rd, and a 5th right there. And that's a nice consonant, pretty sounding square chord. And all I need to do when I'm moving around a particular kind of chord progression, and Matt, I don't know if you come from a guitar background or keyboard-based background or or something completely other. You may be like me and you started off in drums, and now we get to learn all these different new languages for folks. Either way, it doesn't really matter on this. The chord background, as long as I've got my major triad, I can then move that up and down push to be able to create and play back chord progressions. So if I wanted to play in the number system, I'm just going by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And if I wanted to play a very simple chord progression, I kind of think in the space around these blue notes. So think visually in this circle right around my tonic or my root note. Play this is going to be my 1. I know if I play a 5, it's going to have a nice bright triumphant tone. And if I go to the 6 minor, it's going to create just a little bit more mystery. And it's going to almost but not quite resolve if I go to the 4th. And not quite ever resolve until I finally go back to the 1. So these triangles are the way to do it if you've got it in key mode. And that still applies for most of your scales or modes that you choose, but occasionally something like the minor blues, you may want to try a different shape. One I kind of like for this scale is just this little straight up and down line, or a line, something like this. You get some really weird dissonant chords out of that, but I think it's kind of interesting. The other way to work with chords real quickly is right up here at the bottom, or top left, or bottom left to push right up here. You go into chromatic mode, and it's the same layout. You're still using triangles, but they're spread out a little bit more. So my major triad triangle is still this right here, right? But if I wanted to, like myself, somebody who really loves flat 7th chords, all right? So this chord progression right here. All right, I'm going from a 1 to a flat 7th, a 7th chord that's flat, 1/2 step, to a 4th, back to the 1. All I'm needing to do is still think of my triangles, but they're spread apart. The other really cool thing about chromatic mode real quick is that the chromatic mode is set up a little bit more like a guitar. So if you're somebody that comes from a guitar background, you have, it looks just like you're making a bar chord essentially. You've got your root note, and then on the fret just above it, you've got the 5th, and then you've got the octave on the same fret, but the string just above it. And then you've got your 3rd right here, just like you would have on guitar. So it's a nice way to translate that. And if you're staring at chromatic mode thinking, how do people play in this? Start with thinking of it if you come from a guitar background like that. And the other way is practice, just like it is for any instrument. The more you think of push as an instrument, the more it will make you practice, whether that's good or bad news for you. So hopefully that's good news. All right. So we've got some jam chords on push for Matt. I hope that feels pretty good. So JMAC, I believe that's how I did it, or J::MAC. You have push 1st generation. Is it worth trading up to push 2? I think so. I would say absolutely, especially because of what Ableton does with 1st generation pushes, where if you can trade it in, and Ableton will look to give that push to a program for young kids that are in need of some musical equipment coming up, and teaching young people how to create and produce, whether it's electronic music, whether it's rock music, whether it's hip hop, all different kinds of music, but giving them resources from an early age to be able to create. You get to become a part of that when you trade in your push 1, and you get the upgrade to a thing like push 2s. The big obvious change is the display, which really is helpful. And when you're working with something like this, where there's a sample that I'm going to be working with on here, I'm able to see the waveform and zoom and move between those kind of things. I really like the way that the macros are laid out, and the way that I can see, for example, this ping pong delay, some of the visual indicators, like the pattern that it's going with, whether it's in sync or whether it's in time mode. Those little small visual design clues in a live performance setting or even in production setting are worth, they're some of the most subtly neat things about Push 2 specifically. Push 2's pads even feel better. Push 1's pads feel great. And I came from an MPC too, as well as a background, so I'm snobby about pads, but they are great feeling pads on 2. And there's just kind of so many reasons to go with 2, but for me, it always comes back to the fact that live or Ableton itself is taking your Push 1 and helping other people create music with that just as much as you are upgrading a piece of gear. All right, everybody doing well out here? I'm liking the chat over here. I'm trying to make sure that I keep up with everyone. Now, let's look here. So I try to make electricity sounds on operator. So I'm not entirely sure what electricity sounds excuse me, might be, but we can try a few different things on this. So let's see what our electricity type sounds, which could be static or it could be randomized pitches or noise. One of the interesting things that you can do with operator that might be kind of fun to start with here. I'm going to pull up a track. I'm going to take off this kick drum that we've got right here for the moment. And I'm going to take you back to, of course, live. There we go. Now I'm going to pull up a operator here in this MIDI track that I've got. And so electricity sounds with operator. All right, so I'm not sure if this is a randomized kind of effect that you're looking for, or if it's a effect of static or noise or that sort of thing. But one of the more interesting ways to work with operator, and this is one that I've been able to generate some randomness out of almost on accident a little bit, or it's something that I didn't, this wasn't the intended use. But with operator, if you go to the Max for Live LFO effect, so it's under your Max Audio Effects if you have Live Suite. And the LFO is a pre-made effect. You don't need to build anything for it. It's something that's already there for you. You can set that after your operator here. And I'm going to assign the LFO here to, once it pops up, it's going to take a second. I'm going to go into the LFO's mapping button right here and assign it to the coarse control of this first oscillator on operator. So remember, on operator, you got A, B, C, D oscillators to work with. I'm just going to deal with just one. It's got a sine wave up. Excuse me. So that'll be good for what we're doing. And you can see already that the LFO, as it's running here, is playing this sine wave shape to the coarse tuning. Now this is already going to be pretty wacky sounding if I hold down just a single note. And as you can see on push, if I go over here, I'm just holding down a single note on push, right? But it's giving me this really crazy tuning in my coarse tuning controls right here. So if I go back to the LFO device here and choose random on my LFO pattern, now it's giving me a lot of random notes coming from operator. And that may be the electronic kind of robot noise, you know, an 80s robot noise that you might be looking for, but it also might be a little bit too intense in range. You can use this depth control to make it not quite as far ranging when it comes to the robot noises, so you don't get those really high piercing octaves. And I might use the offset knob to bring it back down to the lower octaves just a little bit there. Yeah, something like that. So a specific song request, Lamb Wise Enough at 120. We may come back to that so I can pull up this song and listen to it. But in terms of being able to go in and hear it on YouTube, I might be stretching it a little bit in terms of how the audio setup goes. But if anything, you've got a little bit of like Johnny Five robot sounds ready to go from operator in that LFO. So a question from Moskowman is how to fix Sennheiser HD25 headphones. I'll have to tell you to ask your dad about that one because I couldn't tell you off the top of my head how to fix the headphones. Buy a pair of HD280s. You know, maybe that's the way to fix them, which are some of my favorite headphones for relatively cheap. Yeah. So Rod mentions that when you use the saturator, the kick drum often loses a lot of low end, and that's something that can tend to happen whenever you're using any kind of harmonic effect or an amp effect on the kick drum sound that has a lot of real steady or sine wavy type of low end on it. So one way, Rod, if you wanted to layer that in together, if you wanted to, you can take this chain right here. So you see the kick drum chain as it is in the drum rack. Here's my larger drum rack. Here's the kick drum chain itself, the simpler device that has the kick drum sound, and then the amp, if that's what you're using for overdrive and distortion. And I'm going to rename this chain so it's just real clear what's going on here. That's our kick. And I'm going to call it kick sat, just to be clear. And let's say we've got some pretty gnarly saturation on it. Now I'm going to hold down the Option key, which I believe is the Alt key on Windows. Hold down the Option or Alt key and just drag it down one space. And I'm going to name, it creates a copy of it. I'm going to name the second one Kick Clean. Now I can layer in a clean sounding kick that does not have the amp or anything on it that might be affecting its low end at all. Layer that underneath the original kick saturator. And use these volume controls right here to mix between the sounds. So they're running in parallel. Both of these are being played at the same time, but one of them has a clean, dry kick drum that you could even change the sound itself. So let's say you were happy with the saturated kick but wanted to change this one to something that's a little more of an 808 sound. You could absolutely do that. And let's just layer in I'm going to search real quick here. Let's get ourselves kind of a really deep 808 sound. Get the idea. It's going to be able to layer in really, really quickly with that. Okay. So let's see. Yes, yeah, Dennis. I believe the push trading program is over now, unfortunately. Yes, and they'll, the main thing we'll be looking at, and again, I think I forgot to mention earlier, is when you buy push, and this may be getting close to its end of this promotion period too as well, but occasionally Pyramind does a special where if you get a push, you get free mentorship training alongside of that with Ableton Certified Trainer or with the specialist in push, and that can be a really good way to go about it as well, and a good reason to do your upgrade now. All right, looking at some other questions here. I'm just going to type to you all because this is a nice way to be able to chat both. So, my thoughts on Flume as your favorite artist. I enjoy the mixture of or quote unquote organic elements and electronic elements. I'll pull myself back up here so you can see me. Hey, I enjoy mixing those two elements together a lot, which is something that I haven't listened to Flume tons, but what I have heard, that's kind of been one of the main pieces about it. Another artist I love that does that, I've listened to a lot recently, Sylvan Esso, who just put out a record, and S. Carey always does this stuff too, quite a bit, who plays with Bon Iver some. And so, yeah, that's some of my favorite things with Flume and with artists like that. BSHO asks, how can I learn to use Push 2 before completely learning Ableton? And that's a great question because what Push is doing really depends on what you're trying to do with live as well. If you are somebody who thinks like a producer, where you're trying to build a track from scratch, where you start off with nothing, or you start off with a demo from someone, an artist or yourself, and you're trying to build a track, then Push becomes all of what Live does put under your hands and gets you into a place of contemporary music production using contemporary tools, modern quote-unquote tools, but in a way that's hands-on, in a way that quote-unquote vintage or analog type tools that are used to knobs and faders and things like that. And you have all those same things under your hands. That could be one way you learn to work with it. And the thing with Push is you don't need to know every single thing that an analog device does, or an operator, or simpler. You don't have to know every single knob or what every single thing stands for on this. Push is set up where you can pull up sounds just with your browser without you having to know even Live's browser itself. When you open up a track on Push that is intended to be a software instrument track, all I need to do is go to the Add Track button, and there's nothing I need to know about Live, more or less, to be able to add a track other than when I go up here and I want to add a MIDI track, I can go down to, let's say drums here, and I want to pull in a drum kit. I can listen through this with my preview turned on. So let's say I like this kit right here, this Andromeda kit. I hit the load button, and now I've got a drum kit pulled up in front of me here that's ready to go. And it's that quick to be able to start making sounds, and I haven't had to do anything more or less inside of Live. Push is doing all that stuff for me as well. So it definitely helps to become familiar with Live, but I'd say absolutely that Push allows you to learn Live not only for the first time, but also in new ways. If you're somebody who's a ninja with editing MIDI with your mouse, or entering in things with the keyboard, or with a keyboard-based MIDI controller, or something like a Launchpad or something like that, Push still teaches you new things because of how it integrates with Live, which includes drawing up instruments. It can draw the way you mix, the way you play back things in session view. All that stuff, of course, is on Push. And one of the helpful things with Push, too, is when you're in session view and you have several clips, which I don't have terribly many clips inside this arrangement, but when I have several clips and I can see these things on session view, my 2 clips right here that are playing back, there's my 4 on the floor kick, and then here's a little track that I have in there. Speaking of Sylvanesso, that was a little sample track that's in there. These things are laid out just like my session view inside of Live itself. And so because of that, the session view concept, which can sometimes be for folks that have come from a more linear or time-based background, whether it's Pro Tools or Logic or Cubase or whatnot, the session view can be a little bit of a trip in understanding the fact that you get to sketch your ideas out and without committing them to time in real time first. And then, of course, when you go to arrangement view, then you'll be able to see them in linear time when you play back your ideas. All right, I'm going to pull this back up there. Cool. So BSHO, hopefully that answers your question a little bit, that you absolutely do not need to know everything about Live except opening it up and connecting Push a little bit. And again, Push will help to teach you about Live, and that's the hope. So let's look here. Rafael Valero, you say, I've never used Max for Live. What are some other cool things included there? Now you've hit on one of my favorite things to talk about with Live, just because what Max for Live does and the growing integration that Ableton and Cycling 74, who makes Max and Max MSP and Jitter and all these technologies that kind of sit and extend the way that Live works. That's been the way that it's worked now for a couple of versions of Live. My favorite thing about it is that it makes Live feel like a brand new instrument and really makes it customizable to you. Now, that being said, that's the deep kind of digging in and tinkering with the insides of Max for Live. You don't ever have to do any of that stuff to make it really useful to you. And some of my favorite, just kind of, let's say, bread and butter plugins come from Max for Live, and they're ones that I didn't make, or ones that I don't know anything about the background of them, that have become some of the most useful things for me. So going back to this drum kit right here, I'm going to pull its level up just a bit. All right, that's a good little level. I'm going to pull in a little bit different sound. Actually, we'll go right over here. So I'm going to go to this drum kit I've got pulled up. Now on this drum kit that's on here, make sure that you can see this on my screen. There we go. This drum kit that's on here, I've got a little Dave Smith Tempest sample kit on here and an Ableton glue compressor. All right, so that's doing just a little bit of work for me. Under my Max for Live tab, and this is going back to Raphael's question here, starting with the audio effects, we have audio effects, we have instruments, and we have MIDI effects. Starting with the audio effects, one of my favorite ones is the buffer shuffler. Now the buffer shuffler is the 2.0 is a lot of fun. What it does is if I take and make a little quick drum sequence here. So I'm going to make a quick drum sequence on push. I'll show you guys that just so you have that pulled up. So I'm drawing in a little 4 on the floor kick pattern here. I'll pull my tempo up just a little bit. And I'm going to pull in a little bit of snare pattern. So I've got this little pattern going on. I'm going to turn off buffer shuffler on the screen so you can see this on my DAW. So this is what it sounds like without the max slide effect on it. But when I turn buffer shuffler on, it allows me to quickly rearrange the order and the playback of this loop, including reversing it. I can draw in some stutter, adjust the length of each of the playback notes with the gate control. And all I'm doing is I'm chopping up the drum loop as it comes into the buffer shuffler. You can even repitch some of the points. And it takes whatever's coming into it and rewrites it in real time with these gate, stutter, position controls, reverse controls, pitch. Really, really powerful. And that's just the beginning of it. You can do that in 8 steps, 16 steps, 32 steps. Really, really neat device. One of my other favorite audio effects, and this is no joke, my favorite just reverb nowadays, is the Convolution Reverb Pro. And again, this is one that comes with the Max for Live Essentials, so it's something that's going to come with your copy of Live as it is. The Convolution Reverb Pro allows you to take impulse responses, these sampled actual audio files that are sounds of spaces that have been sampled really, really well, and run whatever audio you have, including this drum loop right through, in this case, a giant church IR. And there's some great ones in here like the Swedish nuclear reactor, in case you've ever wanted to see what audio sounds like through an abandoned nuclear reactor. Or there's some really interesting ones under our experimental tab, including Moist Fork. So this is apparently the sound of drums going through a moist fork. If that's even possible, that's possible with Convolution Reverb Pro. So it's a lot of fun. And again, not even with these kind of crazier or more intense reverbs that we've got, this is my go-to for any kind of high fidelity, realistic reverb sound that I'm trying to get, whether it's on something like drums or vocal. It also allows you to drop in your own IRs. And say in this case, I've got this IR that is probably, yeah, I think it's cut actually pretty well. This one is a sample that I took in one of the hallways of Funkhouse where Ableton's Loop gathering was held last year. And so I didn't have any fancy equipment with me. I had my iPhone and a jacket that I slapped, and it gave me this very kind of reverberant sound. You can hear the reverberant sound by itself, just like this. That's the sound of Funkhouse where part of Loop Gathering is held. And then right here, I just dragged it and dropped it into my Convolution Reverb interface. And now that sample that I have is the reverb. As I play the drums through, it's going to be going through Funkhouse itself. All right, and that's just a real quick 5-second drop in. You can make that a lot more meticulous if you like. Another quick little couple of Max for Live things, and then we'll move on, I promise. The instruments themselves are very, very interesting on Max for Live. One of my favorite sets are is Katsuhiro Chiba's Vintage Synths, I believe is what it's called. It's a pack that you can get from Ableton.com. And the August synth is really, really nice for, take my convolution reverb off and my reverb, my compressor here. This one is a great, if you like very 80s style synthesizer sounds. Finding some sounds that aren't native to Live themselves, but also aren't from an expensive pack or from an expensive VST or AU plugin. This is a great one to go with. Really enjoy that from some of Max's instruments. There are some really, really interesting instruments that Max for Cats are making, including some very modular style and modular instruments themselves. Bengal is a really cool one that takes modular synthesis and puts a modular interface inside of Live as an instrument without you having necessarily a rack full of gear. It's a very, very powerful and customizable synth sound. That's a lot of fun with Max for Live. So it's going to load up here in a second. And so Bengal itself, if I want to pull in, let's just pull in a quick preset sound right here to give you guys an idea of a patch. So this is what Bengal looks like. Very, very cool. This is the semi-modular version. So as you can see, very interesting nonlinear modular type workflow and sounds coming from the Max for Live instruments. Again, didn't have to make any of that. Those are things that are made by different third-party companies like Max for Cats that makes really, really cool packs that you can also find on Ableton.com. Bengal Ocelot is the full-featured modular synth, and then Palace is a new one that's come out too as well. That's really, really cool. And of course, there are some Max MIDI effects, which get really, really interesting. One of, let's see if we've got it right on here. One of my favorite ones here is the humanizer effect. Whoops, that's not the right one. The humanizer effect, which is just going to add in some randomness to the sound itself. So Max Humanizer's there. The simple echo to do echo on MIDI notes is available. And then there are some really, really helpful utilities like the MIDI monitor that can help to show you what exactly is going on when you're trying to troubleshoot MIDI routing inside of your live system. Shows you some things that may not show up inside of this indicator right here on a MIDI track inside of live, but I can see all of the note and CC events that happen right in real time right there, the MIDI monitor. So that's a very quick run through of Max for Live pieces. Raphael, hopefully that's going well for you guys. So let's see. I'm look at a couple of questions here. I'm going to pull myself back up so you can stare at me while I'm staring over here at your questions. All right. So kind of an intricate question. What would be your approach to building a live performance project for an electronic pop duo from Jimmy Maverick, laptop plus push and live vocal? That's a really great question. It is intricate, and there's so many different ways you can go with it. There are some students that I work with. I teach at a university called the Academy of Contemporary Music at UCO, or ACM at UCO, and I've got some great students there who actually do this same kind of thing. They start doing some work as a duo, and now they have a full band that's playing with them behind it, but they use live a lot in a live setting and push to control these things. The simplest approach is really to use live as a playback option, sort of like you have a sampler with several different phrases. And what I mean by that is, let's say you have song A, all right? Hopefully you called it something cooler than song A, but song A, all right? You got song A pulled up, and you have a verse, chorus, bridge of song A. Hopefully song A is also cooler than a verse, chorus, bridge, but you get the idea. So I would take the sounds that I want to play back that I'm not playing back live, whether that's with my voice or with a guitar, with a synthesizer live. Take those sounds, place them in live on a single scene. So remembering in live that my single scene is this horizontal section right here. My scenes, of course, are controlled over my master track or my master scenes. And I would break apart my song. Let's say song A. We're going to do like this, color it something cool. And say song A, and then this is going to be my verse section. The chorus is going to come first. It's really crazy in that. And I'm naming these things so I know what they are. And then here's my bridge section. The simplest way you can use this to play back live is to play back your scenes just like so of the different sections of the song. And you can do that in real time so that it is a performance for the people that are there to see you, not necessarily just playing back, pushing play and then singing along, but it is a performance. You could decide to do a bridge twice. You could decide to do a verse twice, that sort of thing. That's one starting place that you can then break down into a very, very granular kind of setup for your set. You know, verse 1, section A, section B, so on and so on. Now, another way in thinking through your live set that's a little bit more intricate or maybe a little more complicated is designing the sounds that you want to play with live, getting those set up, whether it's with push or with another controller, setting those all up in tracks inside of Ableton Live, and then knowing how you're going to switch and practicing this, because it's just like practicing an instrument. Remember, live can be and really wants to be an instrument for you as a DAW, as a digital audio workstation, music software. It is an instrument and can become an instrument for you. So practice with it, switching between your different sounds. So for song A, you might use one particular synthesizer patch. Song B, you might be playing a really hard acid bass kind of sound. All right. And you just need to practice switching between those. That's simple to do on push. That's simple to do with other controllers too as well. But you want that set up and then practice it as if you brought all your guitars with you and you just had them tuned, you just had the strings set up and the frets redone. Everything's ready to go there for you so that you're not being distracted by the instrument that's in front of you, but instead it feels like push, or what your controller is your instrument right in front of you. And same thing with live, that it's set up so that you're not fighting bad action like you would on a guitar, or drums where a head is really, really pitted out and dead and you need it to be lively and responsive. You would take care of that before you went into your set. So think about that too with your DAW. Hopefully that's not too generic for you, Jimmy, but that's a good couple starting places for getting through there. All right. Scanning over here, looking at some questions. All right. When designing kick, do I always use samples? Do you sometimes create it through synthesis? From Dennis Castains. That's a great question as well. I'm going to probably say that for all of them because I'm just excited you guys are asking these questions, and they're sincerely great. It kind of goes back and forth. I think in a quick, if I'm looking to compose and I'm in that mindset, I'm not too worried about whether I'm designing it out of Operator or something like that, but that is something I do like to do, is design it. Also, Operator is great because you've got I've got it set up my defaults to where it's just a very simple setup, and then I can make it more complex as I go. But it also works in analog or in any kind of analog synthesizer of your choice that you want to use, whether it's native to live or not. But one of the, to Dennis, to finish your question, one of the ways that maybe gives a sound that I enjoy the most, and that's because I don't necessarily work with just within one genre, but kind of just constantly hop in between things, is to design an electronic or an analog model style sound. So I'll go into something like Operator, design a kick drum there, something that feels electronic, and then I'll layer that with something that feels acoustic, or is literally an acoustic sample where you may get some bleed from the snare drum or a little more attack from the beater. And part of that also, even going back to our first talk about getting some saturation around the kick drum, part of the reason I want that acoustic kick drum in there is the way the harmonics work in the acoustic kick drum. The punchiness of it is something that can be difficult to model, or it may take a while to model whenever you're doing that inside of just analog synthesis. You're doing something like Operator. And so same thing happens when you're modeling bass sounds, melodic bass sounds. You may have a bass sound coming from a synthesizer that has a lot more subs to it, but there's a middle harmonic frequency component that's kind of missing on it. And you'll notice this sometimes if a electric bass is playing that live through an amp and there's a response there that's working, and then all of a sudden switches, the bassist, he or she switches to a synthesizer sound, a little microKORG or something. You're going to lose some of those, some of the harmonics of it. It feels almost like the bass goes away, although technically there's lower frequencies in there. It's not just that. It's the way those harmonics work inside the individual bass sound itself. So the kick drums, it's nice to layer those things, acoustic and electronic, together like that. All right. So, and Jimmy, I'm now seeing the back part of your question. They're playing songs that are already recorded and maybe combine it with improv pieces. So combine together what I just, what I said about setting those up in scenes to where you can play back your sections in real time. You have a little bit of that risk factor, which is part of the magic of music. You're risking the form, and it could be a little bit of train wreck, but same thing when you're playing an instrument as well. And then set up alongside your playback tracks a few of the live sounds that you want to play. And start simple with it. Don't feel like you have to start and build a song from scratch in real time in front of everyone where they can see all your mistakes just in that moment. That's not what you have to do from the get-go. You can start off with having just your song sectioned out, and then knowing that, okay, the bridge of this one particular song, I'm going to go to this real-time keyboard that's not in our tracks at all, and I'm going to play that back live. Those can be a great starting place, and something that's not too complicated to do, but still takes practice. All right, so what way can you create multiple sketch ideas before committing them to the arrangement side, from JMAC? Thank you for clarifying that for me there, JMac. All right, so ways to create multiple sketch ideas. This is simple to do both with push and without, but I'm going to set it up a little bit on push so you can see this. Let's say I want to do this with just, I've got this simpler that I made out of a sample here. I'm going to switch back into in-key mode just for simplicity's sake. And pull this up right over here. Cool, we got that synthesizer sound. Let's set OBS up so you can see this. All right, so got this synthesizer sound here. And I've actually taken that synthesizer sound from a little sample, and this can be, something we walk through if you want, if we have time later on. But I took this little song sample right here. So that little song sample from a band called Leica, it's a little bit an older song, I took and put into Simpler, and I'm using just a tiny, tiny portion of it right here to make a granular synth out of it. So it's creating this pad sound, and I like it because it's a really weird source to have that sort of sound, and there's an odd quality to those kind of granular synth pads that I really enjoy, that everyone is different, quite literally, depending on what source you use. Everyone's different from the one that came before it, and you can customize it a lot, but that's a whole other thing. So if I wanted to just maybe try out a few different chord progressions and quickly create between different ideas, let's see, I've got a little drum pattern right here that I'm going to play. Oh yeah, that's right, I put my software synth on that. So let's say I want to play this on our drum pattern here. I'm going to pull up our Tempest sounds right here and drag that back on our track. So I've got this drum sound set up here, and I want to play just a few different chord progressions to it. So we go back to our little synth here, and I'm going to, on push, which I'll go ahead and pull up push here so you can see what I'm doing. I've got my drum loop going, it's set up. Go to push here. When I'm ready, I'm going to hit the record button on the bottom left, and I'm going to play in just a few different chord progressions. All right, some simple ones here. So I'll hit it in the bar before the next one to you. So 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. So there's one chord idea right here. Now, if I wanted to, I can hit the new idea button on push, and it's going to start a new scene for me. Same tempo and everything is still going, but it's going to also take away what I've just played in. So I'm going to play the duplicate button right here. All right. And instead of the clip that I've got on there, use the delete button to quickly delete that clip. I've still got my drum loop going. I'm going to hit record again on push. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Got another idea going. Duplicate again. Delete, take one more idea. 2, 3, 4. Now I can go back to session view and look at my few different ideas that I've got going on and maybe try them out. So here's the first idea I had. Just these two chords, the 4 and the 5. Maybe there's the second idea I played, the 6, 5, 4. And then here's the third idea that I played. All right, it's as simple as that. I'm going through, I'm using the duplicate button on push to duplicate whatever is currently playing, and then using the delete button to quickly delete the clip that's on the track that I'm composing some ideas on, and working from that. All right, and there's a number of different ways, but I like doing that with push. That's just my quick way off the top of the head that I like to do this really on the fly into Sketch. And it absolutely is a sketch pad, especially when you take in session view and you can mix and match between different ideas. I, of course, could go over to my drum track and maybe vary some of these patterns. So, for example, this is the third clip that's on that track. Maybe I put this one to be halftime here. We'll keep that 4 on the floor kick, a little bit slower kick going. Do something like this. And I may make the hi-hat a little bit more regular here. Take off the clap here. Make it go halftime on that particular idea. And I'm going back and forth between my note view and my session view to mix and match my sections between the other. And all this stuff is happening in real time. I can let the music keep going while I'm working on this. I don't have to stop the flow. That's really the goal of it, both the integration of live with push, but also just in terms of my writing. I don't want to get caught up on sound design just yet, at least in this frame of mind. I just want to work with the parts that I've got and think, what are the rhythm telling me? What are the chord progressions telling me? That sort of thing. All right. So we're going through here. Thanks, Chris. Just now saw a heads up. Love the group Humanizer. Also, J74 Progressive is very nice from Dear Lord Vetinari, which is, those are both some great Max for Live extensions. Anybody in the comment? Oh, I wonder why that Max for Live UI was blank. Let me email Pepin. That was weird. I don't know which device that particularly was, but hopefully it popped up there after a minute. Anybody in the comments, you're welcome to, if you want to suggest your favorite Max for Live devices that you've got. There's a lot out there. The other thing I didn't mention is that maxforlive.com hosts almost all of these Max for Live devices that you could ever think of. So if you have an idea for something that you're like, man, I wish Live did this particular function, whether that's something to do with the way the meters work or something the way with the volume is routed or the way MIDI behaves or kind of instrumental sound, you can probably find it on maxforlive.com, and all the Max devices are open source. You can open them up, look at the guts inside of them, see how they did stuff if you're trying to learn. And you don't have to ever do that. You can allow other people to make them and then be able to use them creatively in new ways that we never would have thought of on that. So that's a great resource, maxforlive.com, as well as send one another comments on this. All right. Going down through here real quick. The Launchpad Pro. So a question from Pogo here. I'm using it to record launch MIDI clips to external layer. Is there a way to set the record length to say 8 bars and have it automatically loop for live recording? I haven't used the Launchpad Pro in a bit, so I don't know off the top of my head if it's native to that. But I do know that there's a company called Isotonic, ISOTONIK, and they create a lot of custom scripts that are intended for things like the Launchpad Pro and intended for its use with live specifically. Isotonic could be one first place I go look to see if they have that. I'm not sure. I can't remember off the top of my head. I apologize for the Launchpad Pro if there's something native to it where you can actually set the fixed recording length. Again, and this is not a Launchpad versus push thing. I just was going to show you on push. In case you're curious about that, the fixed length button does allow you to set recording bar length. So we have it at 2 bars, 16 bars, 8 bars, and so on. I usually leave it at 2 bars for standard, but that's there. And if you tap it on to where it glows, then you'll be automatically set up at fixed length. If like that workflow I showed you earlier where I was recording in ideas and I kept using the new or the duplicate or quantize button, you can use that fixed length control to quickly create 2-bar loops as you're working through there. But I was just automatically doing that. Okay. So Pogo, yeah, I apologize for not a clear answer, but I would definitely check out Isotonic. I believe it's Isotonic Studios, ISOTONIK Studios, to see if they have a custom script if Launchpad Pro doesn't do that by itself. How come you've hit delete and the clip stayed in the session? So when I hit delete, that's a function of that creating the duplicate. So as I hit duplicate on push, right over here, in the session, pull up live here, as I'm going to duplicate, it's taking this first clip that I have, let's say this clip right here, which I'll color differently, and then it's duplicating the drum clip over to the new drum clip, and it's doing the exact same thing with the ones I'm recording in with my keyboard sounds right here. Let's say this orange one's the first one, this green one's the second one. But when I get to that second clip, I'll hit delete on it, which you can see me do right here. And then I can record a new clip in because push will be armed and ready to go on that track. And so I can record that new clip in where there was previously just a copy or duplicate of the track that played before it. So it's copying my very first clip down to the second one, but I hit delete to delete that second clip and record a new one on the second slot. It takes the second clip I recorded, and when I hit duplicate, it'll then put that in the third slot. I just hit delete again, deletes the third clip, and I've got a new one ready to go on there. So when I'm screen recording live.exe instead of my desktop, plug in the Max for Live device is not visible. And that may have to do, I'm seeing that from Dear Lord Vetinari, that may have to do with the fact that I've selected a particular screen in this screen streaming program instead of just whatever screen is active. So you guys don't have to see anything else on my computer. And it also is because it sometimes uses custom JavaScript scripts to actually play back some of those visual elements that are in there. But it's not a problem when you're working with live, just standing on there. All right. And then Pogo, another one. You can set it and use it with Looper. You could do that, but Looper, remember, from La Cueva del Oso, which is a wonderful name, by the way. You can use a Looper to do that, but remember that Looper is doing that with just audio clips. It's not doing that with MIDI. So the moment with Launchpad Pro, I hit record and then hit again and then start recording. Cool. Can you please show in Ableton how to make those popular vocal chop leads? Like, for example, the drop of Martin Garrix, Scared to be Lonely. So this would be a great thing, and I know we're getting, we'll see just how chat goes. We're going to be about 4-ish. I don't know how long we're going to be chatting, but we're going to keep going. Wait, so you can see my face so you can know that I mean it. Yeah. All right. So doing some cool vocal chops here. There's some really straightforward ways to do that inside of Live. So there's a number of ways, but this is, let's say, there's going to be 2 different ways we'll look at here. So let me get a vocal sample pulled in for us. I'm going to go very quickly to the samples that we've got native here. I'm going to search in my browser for vocal. I'm going to pull up my DAW so you can see. And I'm going to listen to a few previews. That's not what we want. Yeah. Let's see. We'll go. Finding a good vocal chop here for us. No, we got some phrases in here.
The sounds, the pounds, the mind is time, the mind is space.
That'd be a good one to use. So I'm going to take this audio clip right here, and I'm going to go ahead and close up these other ones just a bit, so kind of clean up our interface here a bit. So we'll call this vocal chop. And I've got this clip playing right here. I'm going to go through this vocal chop, and this is the way you can do this using slice to new MIDI. So that's one of the vocal chopping functions that's really, really fun and simple to do, but it takes just a tiny bit of setup. So with my clip right here, I can see, all right, I can see this audio clip. Here is the clip as it plays.
The mind is time, the mind is space, a horn rush, a bass flush for minds to taste.
All right, now it's a little fast from its original tempo. I'm going to slow down my master tempo just a bit.
The mind is time, the mind is space, a horn rush, a bass flush for minds to taste.
All right, so we've got this cool vocal sample. What I want to do is I'm going to very quickly create warp markers at the points that I want to chop or slice. And this is great for you visually minded folks. You may be used to doing this inside of Pro Tools or Logic or something. You can see the timeline as it's laid out. Now I want to chop it up by putting warp markers on it. So remember, warp markers are created very simply by clicking right here in this gray bar right above the waveform. I'm going to double click to create a few warp markers at key transient moments. And you can see there's little helper triangles, these transient markers, and then pseudo warp markers that pop up whenever you hover over one of the transient markers that help to guide you in creating some of these slices here. And I'm going to go ahead and just do some relatively large slices over each point. You can do this with a drum loop. You could do this with a full band loop. Anything that you're using, you can slice up in this way, and it can get really, really creative. But I'm going to just kind of very quickly create some warp markers. All these yellow tags right here, or pins, are my warp markers. Now I can use those, drag them to move my audio around if I wanted to. But in this case, I'm just marking the clip. Now, over this audio clip itself, I'm going to right-click or control-click over it. I believe that's command-click inside Windows. I want to make sure I'm saying that correctly. But right-click, control-click over the clip itself, and then go to the Slice to New MIDI Track option. Okay? So, Slice to New MIDI Track, it's going to ask me in this dialog to create one slice per, and I've got some options. I'm going to choose warp marker. And then there are different slicing presets. I'm going to use the built-in slicing preset, and that's all you need to do. And I select OK. And now what it's done is it's created a MIDI track or an instrument track here with a drum rack, a drum machine that has this vocal sliced up for me. So this is what it sounds like. And I'll pull up push here so you can see this as well.
The mind, the bass, take a horn time, the mind rush, a horn, the mind rush, a horn take time, the mind time, rush of time, bass flood time, rush of time, bass flood time, the mind time.
And you get the idea. Everything is sliced up in my drum rack here. There we go.
The bass, the bass,
based on what I did with that warp marker. So that's one way to do it. And with this kind of more legato-y vocal, it doesn't have quite the attack on it. But again, not hard to then take a ping pong delay, for example, throw that on the back of it here. And we've got something that already is a little bit more compelling.
The
You've got a really, really chopped up spacey sound on that inside of your sliced new MIDI track right there. So that's one way to do it. Another very simple way to do it is with this exact same audio clip right in here, regardless of whether I have my warp markers on there or not. In fact, I'm just going to delete them for the moment. I can take this and drop it into a simpler. This is one of the updates that happened inside of Live 9.5. This slicing mode in simpler. That's really, really fun. So I'm going to create a new software instrument track right here, which, by the way, you can go to the Create menu, Insert MIDI track, or hit Shift-Command-T on Mac. And I'm going to drop in a simpler device from my instruments, and I'm dropping in the default simpler, not any presets or anything like that, just the default simpler, which will ask me to drop a sample wherever, whatever I want to use inside the simpler itself. So I'm going to drag this vocal into the simpler, and then over on the bottom left of simpler here, I've got classic mode, which plays back my repitched sample. I've got one-shot mode, which is great for drum sounds, one-shots, effects, that sort of thing. Your kind of sounds, right? And then slice is the new mode. And then this is a really, really nifty mode that automatically goes through and looks at those transient markers, just like we saw inside of the clip, and slices it up for me onto push. You can see each slice as it's laid out right up here inside the simpler interface. And you can see this inside of push as well. And you see there's quite a few slices up here. Really, really fun to go through and chop up with that. That's really, really cool. And that's even a simpler way to do it than slicing it to new MIDI. It's not quite as customizable, but there are some really neat effects that you can do by a few little focus parameters. And again, going into this stuff inside a simpler, it doesn't mean that you've got to know what every single knob does, every single menu is, all the hidden stuff. It's just one thing to focus on that could be creatively useful for you, especially if you're trying to chop up some vocal samples. And this is something that comes from Ben Casey, who's an Ableton Certified Trainer, and he did this with Ableton's One Thing series of videos, which you can find on Ableton.com. Really super inspiring, and they're very short videos, so you're not necessarily watching a super long tutorial. This is just a simple, quick musical idea that can be inspiring. But adjust the sensitivity of the samples and assign even that sensitivity adjustment, or go to it inside of simpler on push itself, which it's already up here. You can see on push's display. If you create a clip and then go through and adjust the sensitivity in real time. So I'm going to go through and record a little quick clip.
The mind is time, the mind is space.
There's my
A horn
vocal
rush,
clip.
a bass flush for minds to
Take that
taste.
off here. And let's go ahead and turn on a little bit of metronome. Record a quick clip here. So I've got something like that on there. So now if I go through and adjust the sensitivity, it's going to choose different places for it to play back. All right. Now with a vocal sample, you may not want to do the sensitivity trick quite as much. It's really something that does great on drum samples, things with really clear transients. But even with this kind of odd or vocal sample that's not quite as punchy, you can do that to adjust how much or how many samples you're going to be getting in those slices that you're working with. And back to the old push to question, it's just really helpful to be able to see those slices right up here inside of the simpler display itself. All right. So very, very helpful. And of course, you can use a knob to zoom in and out if you need to into the waveform itself, all without having to look at the computer on that. Okay. Great question still. Let's see here. Well, hello. You haven't seen my face in a bit, so just in case you forgot what I look like, there I am. All right. I'm going to look at these questions again real quick here. Maybe probably vocal chops. Let's see. What day is it? You know, what day is it on any day? But I believe it is Monday, depending on where you are. But it's Monday here right now. All right. I have an audio that I threw into sampler from La Cueva so it gets automatically chopped through the simpler. Yeah. So with my synth and Launchpad, I can play those chop clips, but sometimes playing live, I'd like to change between them. It may be something to go into the slice to new MIDI function instead of dropping it straight into sampler. That might be the way you're thinking of for that, especially in playing them in real time. That's one way to do it. Another may be to use the different chains of that inside of an instrument rack and use the chain selector to change between those chains. But I think the sliced into MIDI might help you out on there, La Cueva. Okay. If the dialogue's into view when they pop, it's a little hard to understand what I'm referring to. The dialogue's into view when they pop. A little hard to understand what I'm referring to. Yeah, email. Ask me again what that was. The dialogues, I'm not quite sure. Oh, when they pop up, I see what you're saying. When my dialogue menus, when I right click over something. I did want to have Zoom pop up, but for some reason Zoom is not working inside the window itself as I would do that inside the DAW. So I apologize for not. That's something that we'll figure out for next time with Pyramind, how to make sure that when I zoom on my computer, it's also zooming for you all as well. See, Studio Manager, do I have a main use for the convert button on push 2? So the convert button on push 2 can convert just like the vocal sample that I had pulled up with my sliced new MIDI track. If you push the convert button, depending on what you have pulled up, in this case the audio clip that I had, I can convert it to a drum rack from a simpler, or if I got the clip pulled up here, let's go into live, make sure that's what's selected. It'll convert then a audio clip into simpler, just like what I did where I dragged and dropped it into it, or it'll convert it into a single drum pad itself. So if I've got a lot of audio clips inside of live that I may want to populate into a drum rack, meaning fill up the drum rack with those, or save myself a click and drag with the mouse, or even in real time if I've recorded, let's say I've got a live vocalist that's singing in a phrase and I've recorded her singing in real time, and I want to chop that up with push without me having to look at a computer, I could record a clip with that into push and then use the convert button to drop that into simpler really quickly. That'd be one of the uses I would use it for, but I honestly don't use it as much live just because that's not commonly in my workflow. But again, that's now something that I want to go try live just because you're asking me about it. So, which is again a fun thing about it. Cool. Other questions? How's everybody out there feeling? Hanging in there? I'm going to take a sip of green Coke here. Hopefully my very low voice hasn't, lulled anybody into just very calm relaxation. Hopefully you're making really cool ambient music right now. If that's it. If I got my SM7 broadcaster NPR voice going on, you're making some cool ambient tracks as we go. Any other questions from anyone right now? How's everybody feeling out there? And I mentioned earlier, while I'm waiting for any other questions, I mentioned earlier a little trick with using any source of audio that you want. It might be an entire song track. I played that pad that was from that song by a band called Leica. And let me pull this back out just a little bit here. It's out of live. And I can show you all that pad trick really quick. So what I did is I took this little audio clip, and we'll pull up the DAW so you all can see. I took this little audio clip right here, which sounds a bit like this. Just a couple of bars of this old song by Leica. And I created a simpler track right next to it right here. So this is just a blank simpler. Again, just like I had pulled up when I was slicing up those vocals a little bit. This blank simpler right here, if I drag and drop this clip into that simpler track, I can then, by using simpler zoom and by using a few functions right down here in the bottom left, which I know it may be a little bit tougher to see. Hopefully you can see this on the screen okay. But the gain, start, loop, or really just the start, loop, length, and fade controls right here, I can actually set the playback of simpler whenever I play a single note to be a lot shorter, to start its playback somewhere in the middle of that sample that I have. And you can hear it right there. I'm going to go ahead and turn warp off also on simpler. And then I'm going to set the length of my playback to be a lot shorter and the loop length to be a lot shorter as well. Let's pull my start back up over here. And let's set our length back. Now as I get this length to be a lot shorter, you begin to get these really interesting glitchy effects out of it. And of course with the warp off, it's going to change the playback speed as well, which is a neat effect for me. So I'm going to pull my loop down just a bit more here. And I'm also going to turn this snap control off. That snaps any of these loop points that I'm making to zero crossings in the audio where the audio waveform crosses the 0 point in amplitude, just to make sure that it doesn't pop and click. But I'm going to turn that off because it allows me to be a little bit more small with these slices that I'm using. And you can hear, as I move this around different parts of the waveform, it gives me all these different timbres and tonality. And I kind of like this one right around here. I'm going to turn the fade control up just a bit to smooth this out. And what I get from this is this interesting little synthesizer sound. It's a little bit dissonant there. Let me pull the link down just a bit. Yeah, that works pretty well. I want to set the attack back just a little bit to be a little more pad-like, and turn the release to be a bit longer. And again, this is all still from this. That's the audio clip that we're using for this sound right here. But I'm usually using a tiny, tiny portion of the sound, using the fade to blend that in and make the loop be a little bit smoother feeling. And able to get a really interesting pad sound out of this. I also like to use the spread control inside of Simpler under the controls button right here to give it a nice stereo effect, stereo detuning. But the other thing I notice about this is that I don't necessarily know what note this is playing. So I can go into Live's audio effects, drop a tuner after it real quickly. When I play what should be a C on push, I can see that it's showing me it's actually playing an F sharp. So I'll go into the transpose button right here under the control tab on Simpler and pull this down to a C. Use detune to just edge it up there. Now it's playing as if it was a regular keyboard, except it's using this really individual, unique sample that I've dropped into it. And then all of the controls inside of Simpler can then be used to shape the sound however you want with the filter here. I'll pull that spread back up here. All right, really, really nifty. And again, just this little random song sample allows me to build a synthesizer in just a couple of minutes that sounds like no other synthesizer that I've ever built before or that anyone has on that. All right. I mean, I know it sounds a little bit like other things, but you get what I'm saying. Okay. All right. So, real quick couple questions, and then I'll go ahead and we can wrap this up if that's okay with everyone there, and it's okay with Pyramind and everyone out there. First of all, before I forget it at the very end, thank you so much to Pyramind, to the Pyramind Mentorship Network for just making this possible. I hope this has been fruitful for you all to do this in real time, to ask some of these questions that may be hard to translate, for me to respond to them, or even for you all to be able to translate and, sending this to someone. If you're interested, there are so many great Pyramind mentors out there. Ones that specialize in Ableton, ones that specialize in Logic, Pro Tools, so on, studio recording, philosophy of sound and music, and live performance with different instruments. All this kind of stuff gets covered by Pyramind Mentors and the Pyramind Mentor Network. So absolutely be sure to check that out at pyramind.com and look for the Mentor Network there. Their blog is really useful, even if something you're not necessarily looking for mentoring, you're looking for some musical inspiration to come in regularly to you. Be sure to check that out. Follow them on Twitter, follow them on Instagram. Use those as moments to inspire you to create music. And I hope that all this leads you all to create some sounds, to write things, to make music with it, not to necessarily just have a bunch of technical techniques and things like that, but actually be able to create and make some things with that. So while I've got that in before I forget to say that about that, it comes from Rod explaining gauge staging and how we should do, or why we should do it and how it works. In essence, what I'm thinking of with gain staging is not clipping the output of your software, and that is the simplest way of explaining it. And you can see this very easily in live whenever you have some sounds that are going on. I'm going to pull the level down here, but we'll put something in here that's just going to clip it. I'm going to pull this level down so you guys don't hear this over here, but you'll be able to see it. That red clipping line right over here, that's what we're trying to should be here. Yeah, hopefully everybody's hearing that okay. Hopefully I didn't take the mic away too soon on that. Because of the delay, this maybe I may be seeing something that has already happened and not happened anymore. All right. Cool, no sound, no service. We're going to simple. Everybody good? Properly by Swinger and Ableton. I feel like my beats are very static. Okay, last couple of questions. Still no audio. Well, where did our mic go on this? Check, check, check. Still make sure this is on here. So no delay on it. And audio here, main aux 1, 2 here. Check, 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 check. I think that's probably what you're looking at. Playing the track about 4 minutes ago. I believe I saw what did that here. Wait for just a second for everybody to hear that. This is the view of me waiting for you, and I'll answer those last couple of questions here, and then we'll be good to go. So La Cueva, you're hearing the whole time. Okay, we're back. Hey, all right. So a couple of very, very quick questions here. These last two ones, because there's some good ones. I apologize for that. I apparently turned something down by clicking on it on accident. That's what you get. We're all experts here, right? So when in doubt, turn the volume knob up. So I believe I was answering a quick question about gain staging, and hopefully you guys didn't get too much just me waving my hands. Essentially what I'm trying to do is set up all my levels so that no matter what, my master output is not clipping on the master track. Now that's done usually by not just pulling faders up inside my DAW until I can hear everything, but by at the very first start of a mix or even just playback, turning up my physical volume controller, whether that's on my headphones or on the speakers I'm listening back onto. If you have a monitor controller in your studio, and maybe using that, but it's using that to adjust to the optimum level first and setting that to where you can comfortably monitor your sounds on an individual track and on some tracks when the faders inside the DAW or on your controller, no matter how you mix, where your faders are set to a level where you have room to go up, that's headroom, and room to come back down too as well inside of a mix. And all of that, keeping an eye on the master fader for your track. I'll go real quick back to the live here. Keeping an eye on the master fader so that it is not ever, let me make sure I'm monitoring it, okay? That it's not ever in the red. So you have different clipping indicators in different software, but this guy right over here, it's always, whenever it's at 0 or set to unity, that your summed sounds are not going into the red. Now, big no-nos when it comes to gain structuring is not just putting a limiter on this track, driving a bunch of things into it, and then being like, oh, it's all good because I've got a limiter on there. Do this all without a limiter first, and then you're going to have some much more proper gain staging than if you just throw a limiter on, because your limiter is going to eventually start pulling those levels down, and it's going to degrade the quality of your sound and your dynamics, and begin to, depending on the limiter, start to introduce some distortion, things like that on there. So definitely. So sorry, Rod. Yeah, hopefully that got you back caught up on gain staging a little bit. If I'm giving you just an A to Z workflow really quickly, typically on a mix, I'll pull all my faders down except for the master fader, and except for my group or aux faders usually. And I'll set my physical volume control on my console, my studio, to be at about 70-ish% of its full range of volume. And at that level, I know that I'm at the optimum listening place to put my faders in the DAW up in, whether it's in Live or Logic Pro Tools, whatever. I put them up to where I've got about, I'm maybe at -12 in terms of an actual level. And that way I can go up and down from there, depending on where my mix leads me. But I know that I'm always listening at a comfortable level there, and it's setting me up for proper gain staging. That's going to vary a little bit between systems, but what doesn't vary is that the minute that your mix summed together exceeds 0 dB FS and it starts to clip on your master bus, that's when you're going to start to introduce clipping and degradation into your final mix that's not going to be possible to take back out of there. Even with like magic from RX, from Isotope RX, that kind of thing. So, cool. All right, so there was one other question I wanted to answer before we go. I know it was back in the audio drama over here. Yeah, so Oh yeah, that was it. How to apply swing and groove in Ableton. This is for Wiki Nick right here. So this is a very quick answer for you. So if I've got a drum track like this one right here, I'm going to solo this drum track. Actually, I'll just stop everything right here. And I've got this drum track up. Pull it up a little bit faster. There's a few ways in which you can introduce swing and groove into your mix. By far the most interesting way for me is to do this using Live's grooves. So with this clip right here, I've got this drum clip. I'm going to close this up so you can see, excuse me, and focus on just this clip. All right. Now, right now, there's actually no swing or no groove to it applied. But right down here, the groove controls for our clip. So I can see that when I double click on this clip right here, there's a MIDI clip inside of Live. I can click on the hot swap button right next to where it says groove. There's two little arrows chasing one another. And when I do that, it's going to open up my groove pool right up here. Very smartly represented by the little waves. If anybody's ever noticed the waves, our groove pool right over here will show us any grooves that we're using inside of our live set. Now, I'm not using any grooves yet, so there's nothing in the pool. Nobody's swimming. But I like to go up here, and again, I started on the MPC, so I'm used to the weirdness of your swing starting from about 50% and going all the way up to 75%. One of the cool things in the previews with the grooves, you hear that little clicking sound, that's showing you what the groove is doing to your MIDI clip. And all I got to do is either double click on this groove or drag it and drop it over the clip that I want to apply to. And now that's about 57% of an eighth note groove here, or eighth note swing. And that's already quite a bit more swing than I had in there. Almost all the time, even if I don't want something that's really obvious swing, I'll drop one of these first three MPC eighth note swings into it, 50 to about 54. Feeling really gnarly, I'll go to 55. That's a great way to introduce some swing into it. There are a lot of interesting swing presets. There's SP1200 presets if you're really into a Kai. If you're into the Logic swing, that's in here too as well. And then a few genre-based ones and some randomized effects. So one of my other favorites is under the rock groove one, the Fatback. And that's an interesting one to mess with. Not only is it adjusting the timing of the MIDI notes, but it's also adjusting the velocity and the way they play. So when I look at my groove pool here, I can go between my two different grooves. I can see how much randomized velocity, position, timing, those kind of things are happening inside the clip. And if I wanted to visually see what it's doing to the MIDI notes when I'm working with swing and clip, then I've seen all the audio notes. Then I can click on the commit button right down here, and it's going to actually change the MIDI notes according to what the groove was applying to them, or how the groove was changing them. Now, the groove being applied to it is non-destructive in MIDI terms. It's not actually rewriting the MIDI notes, it's just changing the way they play back. But when I hit the commit button, that is destructive. It's changing it according to the way that the groove's adjusting it. And of course, I can undo that and go back to the way it was before. Okay. Look through our questions here. Audio's back in. Yes. Sorry about that. Whether you're in Costa Rica, I'm glad it was possible for the skipping ahead there. That was awesome. Cool. Yes. So let's see. We're going to go ahead and call it at that. I think if that's okay with everybody. I'm going to pull up the screen here real quick. Okay. So yes, but yes, absolutely. I know Pyramind has more of these planned. Hopefully I can do some more in the future too with you as well. Feel free to hit me up through the Pyramind Mentorship Network. If you've got questions about something particular with live music production, talking about Max for Live stuff, or working with Push Live, or in the studio, those kinds of things, all of that, love to get to be able to chat with you all more. And hopefully, again, I know Pyramind's got more of this planned, so we'll for sure be doing this more in the future. Thank you all absolutely so much for your time. Thank you so much to Pyramind, to Ableton for how they support Pyramind and music education. And I look forward to chatting with you all either in virtual space or, like Cueva del Oso, if you want to fly me down to Costa Rica, or I'll start riding my bike right now and I'll see you down there in a few weeks and we'll see how it goes. But would love to hear more from you all, and really appreciated you all spending your time. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. And yeah, look forward to seeing you all in the future. Bye.